Great. So let's join together in our blessing. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, ידעי, Today we're going to be diving into the Torah portion Kitavo, and we're going to be focusing on the midah of gratitude. Every time I start streaming, it always brings me away from the sheet that I have to share with all of you. So let me set it up one more time. Okay, there we go. Now we're set. So hakarat hatov, which means really seeing the good in our lives. And there's a tradition, make this a little bigger, of beginning every morning with prayers of gratitude. And this takes place in a few different ways. There's this idea of saying moda'ani, moda or moda'ani in the morning, which is, I'm grateful. I'm thankful to you, God, for the ability to start this new day. There's the prayer Asher Yitzar, which thanks God for the fact that our bodies are working well enough that we could be standing or sitting and focusing on prayer. There's the Nisim B'chol Yom, which are prayers for the daily miracles, prayers for being able to open our eyes and to stand and take steps and to experience so many different aspects of our world. And there's many more prayers of gratitude besides. So why do you think that is? Why do you think we start each day liturgically with prayers of gratitude?
I think it helps get us in that mood of being willing to do gracious things and help people, and really gives us the idea of how we're supposed to live our lives during the day.
Beautiful. Would anyone like to add something to that, or did Jay do such a good job that there's no following that up?
They did a pretty good job there, reminds us of the things that we do have to be grateful. Start you with that with the day, not like, oh my God, my back hurts. It's like, I woke up, I had a good night's sleep. Thank you, God, for a good night's sleep.
Right. Or even perhaps if we had a pretty crummy night's sleep, being able to thank God for some of the things that we do have. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Cornelia, did you want to add something to that?
Well, I was just saying the piece that we read emphasized that gratitude is not just an action, but an inner disposition. So you've all been hinting at that, but if it makes sense to start at the beginning of the day to create an inner disposition. So
it's like literally getting ourselves to wake up on the right side of the bed, right?
Yeah, that's a good image.
I find it really humbling to do it because it's before I get out of bed, I say these words, and I do it because I know that I can't really do the day productively without him in my life. So I find it really humbling. Like even before I get out of bed, I have to say these words to remind myself that this isn't my world. I'm just a small part. So that's why I like doing it.
So it sounds like it reconnects you to this idea of humility. And there's so many, there's a reason, again, I've said this before, right? There's a reason that we always start Musar with Anava, with humility, because without that, all the rest of this is impossible. Yeah, go ahead, Cornelia.
But I want to say, just to put a little trouble in this conversation, at least for me, when I'm thanking God, I'm not sure that there is a God. I mean, or I have the feeling that by thanking God, maybe that helps create a God. So I'm saying it's not it's not quite like thanking someone who's just, I don't know, given me a lift or something, you know. It's different. It's kind of creating something in myself, as well as acknowledging. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, right? Because God is such a complicated term. And very often when we say God, we're not talking about the same thing. Or we might picture a God in the Torah that it's not the God it's not the force, it's not something bigger than ourselves that we connect with, right? So I really appreciate that. And whenever we're talking about prayers and gratitude, that we can open that up to the breadth of what that can mean.
Yeah.
Is there anyone I'm missing who wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of piggyback on what Cornelia was saying. I had an experience. I have a man that I was supposed to marry. Well, my fiance died of cancer, and he was an atheist. And we were in Dana-Farber in Boston, and I remember him turning around to me. This was after a stem cells transplant. And he said, you know, your job right now is to remind me to be grateful. It's the only way I'm going to make it through this.
Wow.
And he didn't make it through, you know, he didn't live, but he did make it through the end of his life with such gratitude and love. And he had such a rich life. And I don't think there's anybody that was religious in my life that ever imparted to me the value of gratitude like this man did. And I always remember that on my worst day, I think of him and Dana-Farber, and I just think, wow, he must have been onto something here. So I appreciate what you said, Cornelia. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's so powerful. Thank you, Shelley.
you're welcome.
Even in a family like mine, where it's like, you know, name your religion, a number are either we don't believe in it at all. But I found out if we say, thank goodness that this happened, that goodness is acceptable. Any of the names of God or anything like that does not work so well, depending on who you're talking to. But I think people want to say that life is good, that this could have ended differently. Beats a blank, you know.
What about the one that says, thank God I was born a man? Is it a little controversial these days?
I don't
Yes.
say it.
It's there.
It's
It
Nice.
certainly is there. It certainly is there. And there's also like, thank you, God, for making me a Jew. And there's other things. And I mean, I choose to read that as being affirming of our identity. I know that that was not necessarily how it was written in the context that it was written, that there definitely was chauvinistic stuff in there. But I think that today we can say, you know what, let's reinterpret this. And it could be more like, thank you for making me in the way that I am today, giving me the identity that I have. But you're right, some of our prayers are controversial, certainly.
Just when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind is Dan Nichols' version of Asher Asar. I'm thankful for who I am, body, for my life, body and soul. I'm beautiful and whole and
a little broken too, right?
And I'm a little
talk about
broken too at the
brokenness
same
too.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. And that too is a blessing. Absolutely. So let's go through a little bit more here. We're going to be focusing, like I said, on Hakarat HaTov, recognizing the good. And this term implies that there's good that's already present in our lives for us to recognize. So we already got into a little bit of this, but for you personally, what helps you to practice Hakarat HaTov? And are there times when that's easier to do than others?
I may sound selfish when I say this, but I think it's easier to practice having gratitude when you're feeling good.
When everything is going well, to feel
Right.
grateful for that. Yeah.
Right.
But when it's, I always think, then how am I going to get out of this hole that I am in right now? What has happened that is good today? Oh, I mean, in a small thing, like I saw a flower. You know, I walked at the beach and talked with somebody for 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it was. It's like, how can I flip this? So right now I'm going negative and I need to come back and go positive. I can't say somebody else should do that for me. I don't believe that somebody else as a person should do that for me. So it's how do I dig myself out?
So are you saying that it's easier to practice Hakarat HaTov when there's a little bit of a struggle there?
No, I'm saying that's when it really makes a huge difference. That's when you're digging yourself out.
Got it.
Who you're struggling with really is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line, even if you were just fired, you know, it's like the person who's going to dig you out is going to be you.
What I'm amazed with, because I have a lot of conversations with people at challenging times in their lives, as do you, Rabbi Catherine. I know you do.
Yes,
And
I
perhaps
do.
many of us as well. And Shelley, I know you've had this experience when you were a chaplain. And what's kind of amazing is that there are so many people that I hear that at really difficult moments in their lives, when there is so much that is going wrong, when they're deeply grieving, I hear from people, I just need to find ways to be grateful. I'm trying to be grateful. I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for that. And really expressing that gratitude at a time that their hearts are broken. And there's something so incredibly powerful and so strong about being able to do that when the world around you is really not going according to plan.
I'd like to say something about Jewish tradition. Oh,
Did you freeze? Okay, go ahead.
when we lose a loved one, you know, there's a period of grief and then it lessens. Then you have the unveiling. And at that point, you say, okay, grief is over. Now we live our lives because that's the way the person we lost would want us to live to begin with. But then we have to live our lives and return that corner. So it's similar to any other analogy, you know, any other time. You know, there's a time, there's a beginning, and then there's an end, and you just have to find that end and make that turn. It's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there ever actually is an end to grieving, but it changes, right? It becomes perhaps a little less intense or less frequent, at least. The intensity can come many, many years later, but perhaps not as frequently.
That's a good explanation. I like it.
So I want to bring in this text, which happens to be one of my favorite midrashim. This was written down by Larry Kushner and talks about the story of the Red Sea and two people's experience during the Exodus. Would anyone like to read this out loud?
I can do it.
Thanks, Irv.
Jewish tradition tells us that the splitting of the Red Sea was the greatest miracle ever performed. And yet we have a midrash that mentions two Israelites, Reuben and Shimon, who had a different experience. Apparently, the bottom of the sea, though safe to walk on, was not completely dry, but a little muddy, like a beach at low tide. Reuben stepped into it and curled his lip and said, "What is this muck?" Shimon scowled, "There's mud all over this place. This is just like the slime pits of Egypt," cried Reuben. What's the difference, complained Shimon. Mud here, mud there, it's all the same. And so it was for two of them, grumbling all the way across the bottom of the sea. And because they never once looked up, they never understood why, on the distant shore, everyone else was singing songs of praise and thanks. Shimon and Reuben, the miracle never happened. Let us all remember to look up and sing songs of praise, remembering the miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea and the miracles which surround us each day.
So as we take in this text, and thank you, Herb, so much for reading it for us. As we take in this text, why do you think Reuben and Shimon didn't notice the miracle?
Because they're constant complainers, and we have them all in our life. I have a poker buddy, and he complains when he loses, and he complains when he wins. So, and it's either a personality trait, a character trait, whatever you want to call it. Constant fetching.
Certainly not looking for the good there.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
What Irv said, it's interesting. I don't know, it's sort of funny, but it seems to me, and I mean, I'm one of these people, there's something fun about complaining, or something satisfying maybe. And it's sort of strange that to feel that kind of being drawn to complaining. But I mean, as I said, I certainly feel it. It's a little harder, it's hard to be to experience gratitude. It's not the first response, maybe. And I don't. It's sort of surprising because, in a way, complaining makes the world look worse.
Complaining passes on passes on to somebody else the burden of making it good.
That's good.
So
Yeah.
so that's
We
really
all-
interesting, right? And one of the ideas in this was that good is always there, but you have to open your eyes to see it.
Mm-hmm.
So this relationship to responsibility is a really interesting one.
Yeah. It's easier to say somebody else made a mistake and they should fix it, not me. I'm a
Right.
victim. Well, you just, gave it all away then.
Mhm. Yeah, Shelley, go ahead.
It also goes back to a choice, in that it's a choice, and that they're looking down in the mud instead of looking up and looking forward. And I think that we just all make these constant choices all the time, every day, every minute. Well, are we going to look down and get stuck in the mud? Or are we going to be looking up and moving forward? And that looking up and moving forward during tough times is the harder decision. It's the right one, though. Like Rabbi was saying, that it's like the key that opens up the door. When you're in the mud or feeling just horrible, just to say thank you, even when you don't feel it, it just opens. It opens everything up for possibility. It's miraculous, really. But it's choice. I think choices.
Yeah, there's one thing in particular that in what you just said, Shelley, too, that I think is worthy of exploration.
Yeah.
You use the word looking forward.
Yeah.
And so in this text, what we see is Shimon and Reuven, who didn't notice the moving forward, didn't notice the miracle, because they weren't yet at a place where they could look forward. They were thinking about the past. They weren't thinking about the future, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually thinking about that this week, that I was caught up in a little bit of pessimism. And part of it was just, I was looking back, reviewing whether I'd made right decisions. And then it hit me. Oh, no. You have to think about, what decisions are you going to be making today moving forward? It has nothing to do with going backwards. And if you go backwards, you are in a place of regret, right? And complaint. So many times. Not all the time, but a lot. So, yeah.
So, I mean, the other question that comes from this then is why? Why do we then look back instead of the future? Like, what is it about that can be compelling for us?
I think it's familiar. it's easy because we know that. The future is a question mark. It's a little harder. And I'll be quiet now because I'm talking too much.
Mhm. Sometimes you're just stuck. Like you're stuck in the mud there, but you've got to take responsibility and walk on your feet and walk out. But a lot of times that means you have to ask for help. And a lot of people, and definitely include myself, do not like to ask for help.
Yeah, it's hard to do. Yeah, Cornelia, go ahead.
Something else is that we may really feel a lot of anger about things that have happened in the past, and that that's very hard to get away from.
Right. It takes a lot of courage and strength to let go of things that aren't serving us. And I think that's a lot of what the High Holy Days are all about, is being able to let go so that we can start something new.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone I'm missing? Because I can only see a few people at a time. Bonnie, did you want to say something?
Well, I came in late, but what I got from this was even when you're walking in the mud, you look for the good. And if they would have just looked up and seen the sky, that would have been something positive out of the muck. So for me, the lesson is remember to look up.
Mm-hmm. Remember to open your eyes. There are blessings there. You don't even realize. Yeah, absolutely.
And I would say that sometimes we need to, if I have a pair of $200 sneakers and I get mud on them and I want to complain, I'm sure I can find the man who's stuck in a wheelchair who would die to be able to walk in the mud. Right. And so what do I have to look at? I have to look at what I still have the capabilities of walking. I still have the capabilities of buying $200 sneakers or shoes. So to look at what others don't have the capability of doing and being grateful that I have, the ability to have things.
Having that perspective. Yeah. Thank you, Frank. That's beautiful. I want to take us into Andrea London's commentary for this week. And this is just a small piece from it. Can everyone see this? Okay, great. Does anyone want to read this piece out loud from When We Think? Okay, if not, I'll read it, no problem. When we think that our good fortune is owed to us because of our hard work, we are less likely to give thanks for what we have. Such thinking is harmful to our souls and detrimental to our impulse toward generosity. Research has found that being grateful makes us happier and more resilient and improves our self-esteem. Physical benefits include better sleep, lower blood pressure, pain reduction, and a greater desire to engage in physical exercise. Interpersonally, gratitude makes us more compassionate, helpful, and kind. Yet because we live in a society in which many of us are blessed with plenty, we often take for granted what we have or take too much credit for acquiring it. It's often easier to notice what we lack instead of what we have. Parashat Ki Tavo teaches us how to cultivate the midah of hakarat hatov, acknowledging the good, so that we might increase our capacity to be grateful. Any comments or thoughts? Do you agree with what Rabbi London is saying here? Do you disagree?
So there's a thing I've been hearing lately in the news, something about this silent quitting people are doing. I don't know if it relates directly, but like people at work who give up trying. It's not that, but they stop striving, stop trying to do a good job. Just do the bare minimum to get the paycheck. I didn't understand that. Why? That a generational, is that a group of people and age-wise that are doing things like that? Or it just didn't compute.
That sounds like burnout to me.
I just had an incident with a dear friend of mine who came back from vacation, and it was the worst vacation of her life because 3 of the 8 of them, or 4, half of them got COVID, and they had to come back home from Colorado separately, and she had to cancel her trip to London. And I love my friend dearly, but she got caught up in all that this trip cost her, as she couldn't take her niece to London, and my life is ruined because my husband got COVID. And without ever acknowledging, I have my home. I have this wonderful view from my house. I have my husband, even though he's got COVID. You know, I've got clothes to wear. I've got wine in my wine cellar, kind of thing. And it was like not being so hung up on the negative in the muck of the moment of COVID crap, not being able to see the bigger picture of all the blessings that were around her. It's right here.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, go ahead, Michael. We hear
Is this
you.
on Facebook? I hope I don't get in trouble. Okay.
All right. So I was having trouble getting on to the service today, but I wanted to say that in the very beginning, you were talking about acknowledging the good, realizing what we have that's good. But I'm thinking of a nephew of mine who is totally paralyzed, and it's only that his brains and his eyes are working because of multiple sclerosis. And it's very hard for people who have terrible chronic diseases to perhaps see the light at the end of the tunnel, because their conditions most likely will never ever change or improve. In his case, it's miraculous that, you know, I can speak with him a bit, because it's hard for him even to talk because his muscles of respiration are failing because of multiple. But I mean, right? So if your disease or condition is acute, you can maybe see the light. If your condition is serious and chronic, it might be very difficult to express the gratitude for what you have, because you've lost so much.
Yeah, sometimes that can be the case, and that can be where community comes in. And sometimes it could be that the people who are struggling the most are actually the best at finding gratitude for things. I've seen that so many times, but with chronic conditions, it can be hard. It ebbs and flows because we're human.
Yes.
Most of the things that have happened in my life have been serendipitous, not having to do with hard work, although that probably played a little bit part in it. But most of it, I'm grateful for the accidents that happened. That I met my wonderful wife, and that I got the great job, and we got the great location, and had the great family. It was by just the accidents in my life are far more valuable than the planning I did and hard work I did.
It's the idea of God remaining anonymous, right?
Right.
No coincidences.
Well, sometimes something that seems horrible at the time in retrospect frees you up and was a blessing. But that takes a while to get to. You know, one day you say, oh my goodness, I couldn't do this if that hadn't happened.
Right. And that's the story of the like there's a big Jewish story that speaks to that, but there are all of these different things that happened, and the things that seemed to be blessings ended up not being, and the things that seemed to be calamities turned into blessings. And sometimes in life, we just don't know. Yeah, Cornelia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to express it, but this idea that that we believe that our good fortune is owed to us because of our hard work. That interests me, and it makes me think of the Protestant ethic and the rise of capitalism. You know, that we're I mean, I certainly feel growing up in this kind of environment where you have to work hard and you have to succeed. And if you succeed, then you're kind of a good person, but otherwise forget it. You're not. And so hard work is, I don't know, it's kind of a kind of self-centeredness. Maybe that's what I want to get at. And so to read that to be grateful would improve our self-esteem instead of achieving through work. That feels, in a way, it feels like a liberation, but very, very different. Yeah, so I mean, it seems like getting off that sort of guinea pig, you know, running around in one circle, on the treadmill, and not being able to get off. It, in a way, it feels as if that the competitiveness and the urge to succeed is like running on the treadmill, and being able to take a step back and think about gratitude and other people. That's like getting off the treadmill, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I see this as a response to this kind of idea that if I'm doing well, it's because I deserve it. If someone else is struggling, it's because they did something wrong. There's something wrong with them, and that's why they're not succeeding. But if we were to come from a place of gratitude and say, you know what, I'm succeeding in my life because I've been given so many blessings. It's not because I'm better than this person next to me. It's because I've been given this blessing. So if I've been given this, so much of a reason for me to reach out to others and for us to uplift one another, because who knows what this person standing next to me is capable of doing if I extend myself to them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at a couple of these texts from this week's Torah portion. Let's start diving into them. And there's two in particular that I brought in. We know we're toward the end of the book of Deuteronomy at this point, toward the end of Moses's words to the Jewish people. And he says, when you enter the land that God is giving you as a heritage, and you possess and settle in it, you shall take some of every fruit of the soil, which you harvest from the land that your God is giving you, put it in a basket and go to the place where your God will choose to establish the divine name. You shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before your God that I have entered the land that God swore to our fathers to assign us. So essentially, there's this kind of piece that he's trying to set up so that when the Jewish people enter the land, there is a tradition of giving our first fruits, giving the very first beautiful growth, not eating them, not saying, okay, I have the first fruits, time to have a feast, but rather actually handing them over from a place of gratitude. And I brought this up before, but when I was in seminary, I went to a small community in the Yucatan Peninsula where I met a woman by the name of Magdalena. And this area, there were so many people who were suffering malnutrition, terrible, terrible malnutrition. And AJWS came in to try to teach organic farming and to try to help them to build some farms that were sustainable within their community. There were a lot of reasons that hadn't been happening before that, largely capitalistic greed, but they were reworking the land so that they could build these organic farms. And Magdalena, whenever there was fresh crops, she would always sacrifice a little bit from those crops. And it was solely from a place of just gratitude. And some people could ask, well, okay, people are suffering malnutrition. Why are you offering up any crops as opposed to making sure that people can eat from them? But it really centered the entire community, this practice of giving something back and just the gratitude, the ability to do that. And I found it to be so incredibly profound in a way that I hadn't considered before. Any thoughts on this text before we go to the next one? Yeah, feel free to jump in. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I feel I'm talking a lot, but I just want to mention that it does take one back to Genesis, and the first account of creation of the garden and the fruits and the be fruitful and multiply. And I think it's very beautiful. It kind of redoes the creation of beings and thinking beings and animals and people. And so that's a very beautiful thing about the sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a long-standing tradition of that. It puts it in context in a way that maybe we today don't necessarily have in our lives. I'm not saying that we should be sacrificing animals or things today, but to be able to connect with what was so meaningful about it, I think we can learn from. So one more text of what, sorry, things are popping up on my screen. There we go. One more text. This is just, I think shortly, very shortly after the first one. You shall then recite as follows before your God Adonai. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the God of our ancestors, and Adonai heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, our oppression. God freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, by signs and portents, bringing us to this place and giving us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, God, have given me. You shall leave it before your God, Adonai, and bow low before your God, Adonai. So when you look at this text, does this remind you of anything? Do you recall reading this at any particular Jewish holiday? My father was a fugitive Aramean.
Yep.
Rabbi Catherine, were you?
I kept thinking Moby Dick or something, or
Not Moby.
or the old man in the sea, or where is this?
Passover.
Yeah.
Passover, yeah.
So in the Haggadah, and maybe not in everyone's Haggadah, right? There's a lot of stuff that could be in a Haggadah, but this is a traditional text that's done during Passover. And why? Why is it, one, that it's done during Passover, and two, that it's tied in with this offering of the first fruits?
Passover is all about being freed from Egypt. The whole thing circles around that. And the point is to teach our children what happened and gratitude there. I always wonder what they do with the fruit, but maybe it goes to the priest because we know they don't have gardens in places.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's a text a little bit later that talks about making sure that fruits and different things go to, widows and strangers and orphans.
Right. So it's a parallel story, right? To our being saved from Egypt, like by God.
Yeah, it's not a parallel story. It is the story. So when it says my father was a fugitive Aramean, it's referring to Joseph.
Oh, I didn't know what Aramean.
Yeah, and there's lots of commentary and stuff like that. That's not so obvious. So Michael, don't feel bad about that at all. But that's what it's referring to.
I have gratitude. I don't feel bad. It was just lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting from the beginning of when the Jewish people entered into Egypt, everything they went through, and then their entire journey out of Egypt to finally, after all these years, make it into the promised land.
Okay.
So what does that have to do with the first fruits that the people will offer as soon as they enter?
If these are the fruits that you raised yourself, you have to have had land to do that. And if you'd planted those from seed, it takes a number of years before you have the first fruit.
Yeah, well, that's actually true. It's not right when they enter the land. It's when they finally have these fruits. So thank you.
Michael, you remember when we were in Israel, we went to the food market, the famous food market. And I kept noticing that on the side, it was like a shelf, and there were some of the vegetables or whatever the produce was on the shelf. And I said, what is this for? It said, well, this is for people who can't afford it. And it's done in a way that if somebody reaches down and takes a piece, it's not so obvious. And I thought, boy, that's really cool. And that kind of relates to this always has to be giving for whenever you prosper. Or when
Yeah. Because it's not just giving, it's also doing so with dignity. It's not, I'm better than you, and so I'm being nice. It's
right,
rather
exactly.
like we're both human beings and we help each other out.
And I think the giving of the first fruit is, I know we keep saying our fruit, but nothing is really ours in the end, right? Nothing is ours. Everything is God's, everything. I mean, so I think that when we start to put that the first fruit or any of this fruit isn't really ours, even though we put the hard work into it, it's not ours, because people shouldn't have survived the journey through the desert. They shouldn't have survived a lot of this stuff. So to remind us that we survived because Hashem got us through this, that nothing is ours. It's nothing. So that's the way I take it.
A lot of our holidays are surrounding the agricultural seasons. They probably, I'm sure they come from primitive religions or different religions. And there's always a celebration at that time. And I think this is a way of including people in that celebration as well. I mean, they get some of the first fruits, just like the party you're going to have.
Yeah, the biggest holidays, the biggest Jewish holidays of the year are all around harvest holidays, because that's when people would go to Jerusalem, even when they were further out, offering sacrifices of some kind, right? We have Sukkot, the big harvest holiday filled with joy that happens in the fall, right? We have Passover, a big harvest holiday in its own right. And then we have Shavuot, which is connected to receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. All of those are harvest holidays. I'm going to bring us into another commentary by Rabbi London, who was talking about actually words taught by Rabbi Ben Hollander, who taught that this ritual is an annual aliyah, lifting us out of the mire of our daily tasks and redirecting us to recognize the blessings in our lives. It acknowledged in Martin Buber's phrase, God constantly renewing gift of the land. When we are caught up in the daily grind, our focus can be limited, and we might fail to see the goodness all around us or acknowledge the source of that goodness. This ritual is a corrective to our tendency to take for granted or to take sole credit for what we have. So essentially, in having this tradition of offering the first fruits every single year, it brings us back to that place of gratitude, because sometimes all of us can start moving away from that for a variety of reasons. And actually, yeah, Cornelia, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, the word acknowledge I wanted to mention in this passage. It's really important for gratitude. I'm thinking of the contrast between knowledge and acknowledge. So knowledge is something that you can accumulate yourself, but acknowledge is in a relationship to someone else. It also calls up the idea of humility, recognition. And so that is very important for gratitude. It's a relationship sort of midah. And it's a very interesting word, acknowledge, I think. They change between, just by adding the A to knowledge, it becomes quite a different meaning and dynamic.
Yeah, you're right. It becomes so relational. That's beautiful. I was going to ask a question around that, but I actually think Yeah, let's do this one first. So each of us can recall moments of gratitude and relief when a painful event has moved into our rearview mirror and no longer has the emotional grip on us that it once had. And that refers to the comment in the chat too about COVID, right? When we get through it and we're okay, perhaps that's the moment for gratitude. In Jewish tradition, we recite Birkat HaGomel after recovering from an illness or having made it safely through a treacherous situation. The blessing states, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has bestowed every goodness upon us. May the one who has bestowed goodness upon us continue to bestow every goodness upon us forever." It is then customary to give tzedakah in gratitude for having survived a difficult experience. In the same vein, we read that our gratitude for liberation should induce us to give to others. As you shall enjoy together with the family of the Levite and the stranger in your midst, all the bounty that the eternal your God has bestowed upon you and your household. And that's a quote a little bit later on in our same portion. At the Seder, we say, "Let all who are hungry come and eat," acknowledging that when we remember our hunger, our compassion for those who are in need flows freely. To grow in empathy toward others is not enough to acknowledge our previous difficulty or deprivation. We must also recognize the good fortune that has contributed to our progress, lest we become smug or self-congratulatory. So reading this, like I'm seeing a lot of nodding, of agreement with these ideas, right? And so what I'm wondering is, what if we all agree that this is important, that it's really, it can make our lives much more meaningful and peaceful and relational when we enter them with a place of gratitude. What are the things that get in our way from doing that? What impedes our ability sometimes to acknowledge the good that is in our lives?
Our ego.
Can you say a little bit more about that, Jay?
I think sometimes we have to think of ourselves as tough and strong. And sometimes we don't have that ability to, sometimes we think being grateful means we're being a little weak sometimes, or we're not that strong person. But I don't know if I agree with that totally after I just said that. Because to me, being able to acknowledge, our things that we're grateful for help you become a little more whole and together. I've been doing a daily blog each day since the pandemic started, and a lot of times my top 5 things are the things I'm grateful for, and it's been really helpful to keep me focused during these past couple of years of craziness. And when I had COVID, it was the thing that kept me going.
Yeah, beautiful. Shelley, you look like you want to say something. Am I wrong?
I always want to say something. No, no, I think the thing that gets in the way for me is just, like Michael was talking about, sometimes pain, whether it be emotional pain or physical pain or hardship, having to do with my children or my friends. And sometimes it's just hard to be grateful. So that gets in the way. One of the things that really is helpful, though, is being around people who are suffering, maybe more than I am, and that are grateful. It seems to just pull me right back to knowing that, hey, there's just so many things besides these things that I'm worried about or stressing about that I can be grateful for. So I guess that's all I want to say. So it's difficult at times, but there's choices. Okay.
Yeah, and it sounds like one of the things that helps is being in a relationship.
Yes. And I just just want to add one thing, and you mentioned that, when people are going through really difficult times and it's really almost impossible to be grateful or to express that, the importance of community. And that if we are in relationship, we have to do that for each other. We really do. We have to, just like my late fiance said, even though it's a personal choice, the very fact that, he knew enough to know that he needed someone to help him do that. And I really think that it's done together. It can't be done just alone. So,
yeah. I mean, for me personally, I think that it can be harder to be grateful. And this is just what I've gotten both from my own personal experience and also from others. When we feel alone, when we feel disconnected, when we're reading the news and we're feeling bogged down and we feel like we can't talk about what's going on, we feel isolated for whatever reason, that's where gratitude becomes really difficult because we don't feel seen.
Yeah, that's it.
And so the way out of it is through community, through a connection to something bigger. And I think that's part of the reason why during the pandemic, our community has grown stronger, because we've needed that. There's been this internal yearning that so many people have expressed. I need people. I need things to uplift me, to connect with, to talk about deeply. And if we look there are so many different articles written from psychology about just how lonely people are. And this is in lots of different demographics and social situations. We live in a world that can be very, very isolating. And that's part of the reason that I think religious communities, and not just religious communities, but I think there's something that is particularly special about religious communities, are so needed at this time.
So I lost my oldest son when he was 19. He died in a car accident, and today I'm in recovery, as some of you know, from drugs and alcohol. And in the last 2 months, some other members of my recovery community have lost their children, and my sponsor and myself, that my job is to reach out to those men and say, you can get through this. Like, you can stay sober. You don't, your son, one was a son and one was a daughter, that you don't let this passing be the thing that breaks you. And then the reason why I get to say that to them is I get to say, because your job is in 2 years from now, because I know right now, just losing their children isn't the time to go, you're going to go help somebody else, or, this pain is good because later on, because you couldn't have told me that when my son died, that this was good then. But I can tell you that today, I know for a fact that I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to put my hand out to another man and say, because they're part of my men's recovery group, that I get to say to them, I got through this and you can get through this. And that's taking that bad and being grateful that, I was able to do it, and that hopefully they will be able to do it. So that's kind of what I'm taking from the reading.
Thank you for sharing that, Frank. There's so much power in what's been shared today. I'm really moved by everyone and the wisdom that's being brought in here. We have 5 minutes left, and I'm always so sad that we don't have enough time together. I always want more. We have quite a number of texts. Clearly, we're not going through all of these, but I can't do Musar without bringing a little bit of Alan Marinis into it. Hold on, let me get to the piece that I wanted to get to. Okay, so he teaches there's no limit to what we don't have. And if that's where we focus, then our lives are inevitably filled with endless dissatisfaction. It's also true that even if we are aware of our gifts, we tend to grow callous to those fine things that pepper our lives, so that after a while, we no longer even see that they're there. We come to take the good for granted. When gratitude is a living reality well established in our hearts, however, we constantly refresh our vision so that we make accurate note of the good that surrounds us. This is the ethos of what lies behind the ancient proverb, which asks, who is rich? And then answers, he who rejoices in his own lot. Live like that, and you will suddenly discover that you want to give thanks for anything or anyone who has benefited you, whether they meant to or not. Imagine a prayer of thanks springing to your lips when the driver of the next car lets you merge without protest, or when there is electricity to light your room, or the food is adequate. Giving thanks can become a flow that waters the fields of life. It's really powerful, right? And I don't know that too many of us have the capacity to offer gratitude for all of those things all of the time. But I think there's some wisdom to the Jewish idea that we offer 200 blessings a day. And the point of that is that we need to find things to bless. And I'm not saying we need to count our blessings every single day and make sure we hit exactly 200, but if we were to offer lots of blessings a day, it might change our very way of looking at the world. We're looking for things to bless. We're looking for opportunities to find gratitude. How would our lives change if we were doing that?
I have one suggestion for next year.
Yeah.
I just hope whatever we do, that we include Musar in some way. This has been revolutionary to me. And, you know, I've been involved all my life, but Musar has had the most impact. And so whatever we decide to do, whether to do prophets or Talmud, whatever, keep connecting to Musar because it's just wonderful.
I'll definitely keep that in mind. I find Musar to be really, really compelling as well. I'm just beginning my journey and learning it. We have people in our community like Bonnie who have been students of Musar for a long time. What, 15 years now, Bonnie?
Since 2003.
2003. I thought it was 2007. So even more than that.
Are you going to read the Rabbi Nachman quote to close with?
Would you like to, Bonnie?
Because this is like the mantra of what this whole discussion has been about.
Yeah.
Rabbi Nachman, his wisdom, I mean, he died a young man, he was only in his 30s, but what he contributed are little vignettes of wisdom like this.
Yeah.
Gratitude rejoices with her sister Joy and is always ready to light a candle and have a party. Gratitude doesn't much like the old cronies of boredom, despair, and taking life for granted.
That's nice.
That's it. That's the Kavanah. That's the Kavanah for life. That's all we need.
Yeah. So if in some way we can latch on to this idea of gratitude and find more opportunities for ourselves to express gratitude for some of the things that it can be all too easy as human beings to take for granted, then perhaps that'll root us, center us in what matters most. So as we're closing out today, I just want to extend my gratitude for all of you. Doing Torah study and being and learning with all of you is definitely one of the highlights of my week. And this class in particular, I found to be really, really powerful because of the wisdom that was shared.
I have a closing prayer.
Do you?
Yes.
Well, hold on one second, because I wanted to ask a question not related to this really fast first. And I would love to end with that prayer in a moment, if that's okay with you.
Perfect.
Okay, so two things. One is I'm still trying to figure out exactly what we'll be doing next year for Torah study. I know there's been a lot of different ideas thrown out there, going into the social justice commentary, going into our Haftarah readings. I hear the desire to continue to stream some Musar through it, which I will do my best to do no matter where we go. But I'm going to send out an email to everyone, and I'm just going to ask that you respond with what your preferences are. I'm going to try to make it as democratic as possible, and whatever the most popular response is, that'll be where we go for this next year. So you can reply to me personally or communally, it doesn't matter, but I will tally it all together so that we can figure out where we'll go after Simchat Torah. Okay, Bonnie, take it away. Thank you.
Okay, this is a closing prayer for Avad. Let us give thanks and praise to the source of blessing, that our practice of Musar may continue to touch us, to change us, and to bring balance to our souls, whatever obstacles or challenges we may encounter on this path toward wholeness. We bless you, Adonai, and we thank you for having this session of sharing and loving. Help us with our Musar practice through the coming period. Help us to maintain a spacious mind by recognizing the good in every person we meet and every situation we encounter, realizing that they all can contribute to this path toward wholeness. Amen. May it be your will.
Amen. Beautiful.
Amen.
Next
Rabbi,
week.
Amen.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Frank.
I was just going to say, so if I vote for something and it doesn't win, can I say that it's rigged and throw a big protest?
Yeah, if it's the same thing that I want, then yeah, we'll do it together.
Well, here's the thing too. We have many years to study Torah, right? So that, like, whatever the majority is this year, that's what we'll go with. But if there's a desire to do something else, we can always do that in the year after. So these are not going to be thrown out. They'll be kept for future years. So you can respond however you'd like, but hopefully we can do all of it. Okay, so next week we are going to have Torah study, studying Parashat Nitzavim. I will not be leading Torah study between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. If someone here would like to lead for the group, I am totally open to that. Let me know. If not, we won't have it for that 1 week, and then we'll come back together after Yom Kippur.
Rabbi, since I didn't get a chance to do mine because of what happened, I will be glad to do it.
Good.
Wonderful. Thank
Good.
you so much, Jay. That'd be great. So
Nice.
good. There will be Torah study then between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Fabulous. Okay, I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
So much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.